Good morning. We'll call the April 27th, 2016 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency to order. Before we start our business this morning, though, I would like to take a moment to say a few words about former PCTPA chair and former Rockland Council Mayor Kathy Lund, who passed away a few days ago. Kathy was a colleague and a mentor and a friend to many of us here today, and certainly those who served on this board and its staff in the years of her service to PCTPA. Kathy performed her public service in the spirit of this agency's mission. She led the board in making decisions good for all of Placer cities and the county. Later in our agenda today, there'll be an opportunity for our executive director and other members of the board to make comments if they wish. Now I'd like to ask the board, the staff, and the public to join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We'll move on to the flag salute. Diana, would you please lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will the clerk please call roll?
Here.
Nader. Nesbitt.
Here.
Rohan.
Here.
Russland.
Here.
Trevis.
Yes.
Thank you. We're on item C of our agenda. This is the approval of the minutes of our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstain? Okay, the minutes are approved. We're on agenda review. Celia, is there anything you need to update us on for the agenda?
I just wanted to point out that you have a pink this morning because we inadvertently left out a project on the list on page 14, the I-80 Auxiliary Lane project, which we're going to be talking about. So please insert that into your agenda at page 14.
Thank you. All right, then we'll proceed. We're on item E of our agenda. This is a time set aside for anyone from the public who wishes to address this board on an item that is not on our agenda today. Does anyone wish to address the board? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move on to item F. Item F is a consent calendar. We have one item. It's considered to be non-controversial and will be acted upon without a staff presentation unless a member of the board or the public would like to remove it for a staff presentation. Does anyone wish to do so? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, the consent calendar has been approved. We'll now move on, adjourn as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and convene as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. Item G is our consent calendar. Again, there is one item which will be acted upon without a staff report unless a member of the board or the public would like to remove it for presentation. Does anyone wish to remove the item? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, the consent calendar has been approved. We'll now adjourn as the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency and convene as the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and move on to item number H. Item H on our agenda is the Interstate 80 Auxiliary Lanes Preferred Project Alternative, and we'll start with the staff report.
Good morning, Chair Rohan, members of the board. We're going to be walking through the alternatives. The alternatives for the I-80 Auxiliary Lanes project, and we're also going to be going through the responses to comments on the draft environmental document. The project has two locations. One is on eastbound Interstate 80 from State Route 65 to Rockland Road, and that's in the city of Rockland. And then the other location, location 2, is on westbound Interstate 80 from Douglas Boulevard to Riverside Avenue, and that's in the city of Roseville. Our project development team, which includes all of the agencies shown here, have been using these 5 key goals to develop the project alternatives. And at location 1, which is eastbound Interstate 80, the main concern here is safety. We actually have 2 lane merges in about 2,000 feet just east of State Route 65. And then this photo here actually shows traffic backing up from the Rockland Road off-ramp onto mainline Interstate 80. So to improve safety along this part of eastbound Interstate 80, we're proposing to extend the existing 4th lane from State Route 65 up to Rockland Road and then widen the off-ramp to 2 lanes. On westbound Interstate 80, this is location 2. The main concern here is traffic congestion, as many of you have probably experienced as you approach Douglas Boulevard. And this is a picture actually from the Douglas Boulevard overcrossing. And traffic is actually backing up onto the local streets from mainline Interstate 80. So to reduce actually traffic congestion on westbound Interstate 80, there are actually 2 build alternatives that we're looking at. The first one is to build a auxiliary lane from the Douglas Boulevard loop on-ramp to the Riverside Avenue off-ramp. And then the second alternative is actually to build a 5th lane extension. So we have a continuous 5 lanes from east of Douglas Boulevard to west of Riverside Avenue. And I do want to note here, you can see at the Douglas Boulevard off-ramp, currently there are 2 lanes that exit there, and to fit the 5th lane under alternative 2, we need to reduce that off-ramp to 1 lane. But based on traffic analysis that's looked out to year 2040, that off-ramp will operate acceptably with just 1 lane. We actually began on the environmental document in early 2014, and in May of 2015, we held 2 community workshops, one in the city of Roseville, one in the city of Rockland. And those workshops were noticed in the local newspapers, and also notices were sent to everyone within 1,000 feet of the project. And now actually Liz Diamond from Docken Engineering is going to walk us through the comments received on the draft environmental document.
Members of the board, thank you. The environmental document, oops, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. The environmental document that was prepared to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, was an initial study with a mitigated negative declaration. The ISMND documents the potential effects of the project on various environmental factors such as traffic, noise, air quality, and so on. It also contains within it avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures that help ensure that any potential impacts are reduced to a less than significant level. The ISMND, for short, was circulated to the public for 30 days between January 11th and February 11th, was also presented to this board during that time frame at the board's January meeting, where we went through the various analysis points in those environmental areas. During the public circulation, we received 20 comments. 11 were from residents, 2 from business properties, and 7 public agencies. In location 1, which is the location from 65 to Rockland Road in the eastbound direction, the comments were from these general areas shown on the exhibit. They tended to 2 main categories: noise, impacts, concern for noise, and also potential impacts to Secret Ravine. And you can see this area where Secret Ravine is at. Concern for disruption to the ravine. So I wanted to point out that the project is limited to work within the state right-of-way, within the fencing that is already out there. There are some drains that do drain into Secret Ravine, but we do have minimization measures about treatment features such as swales and such best management practices to reduce potential impacts. As it relates to noise, Many of the comments came from this area shown in the exhibit. The project that we're here today for, the auxiliary lane project, actually starts to the east in this area. We already have 5 lanes that come on. This is the 5th lane and the 4 coming through. So the actual pavement widening in order to keep that 4th lane to continue on to Rockland Road starts where indicated on the exhibit, and it is more than 1,000 feet away from this particular area. That's not to say they don't hear noise. There is noise there now. There will continue to be noise. It's just that at that distance, the impacts of this project would not be discernible change, and they are farther away than would be that would meet the threshold of significance for a noise change or noise increase. And the picture to the right just shows the view, current view, which we do not see changing as part of the project. We also got comments in this area. We do have the existing wall, and just to remind folks, or for those that are here that haven't been here before, we have an existing sound wall along China Garden. It does end here to the east. This is this spot here is this end of the wall, and the road dips a bit before it comes up to the berm. So there is a gap in the end of the wall and the berm. So there is more of a opportunity for noise to come into this area. And so we had a couple residents in this area, one in particular that wrote to us just asking, why the wall wasn't there. And again, it's not that there isn't noise, but the noise analysis shows that the noise is not going to increase the level to be above the noise abatement criteria or within 1 decibel of it. So the extension of the wall is not proposed as part of the project. I would tell you also that as part of the noise analysis, when you have a wall, you also look at what it costs to build that wall and what's a reasonable and feasible alternative. So on the other side, to point out, the existing wall is here. There is a wall extension to the west. So some of these folks commented, but these folks do meet that threshold. The noise level exceeds the threshold, and the project does have a mitigation measure to extend the wall to the west as shown in the exhibit, but not on the other side. And since we've got a comment on it, I want to make sure and point it out to you. One of the other comments we had was from the folks that own the site where the Park Hotel is at. They were concerned that the project might obscure the view to their business. So we prepared this rendering to just illustrate that their site is indeed higher. In this area also, the sound wall is not being extended. There is no existing sound wall, and it's past where that berm is I talked about. So the roadway, China Garden, is about at grade with the freeway, and you can see across it. Now, we are proposing as part of the project a safety barrier, which you'll see right here, the typical concrete safety barrier that you see when you drive along the highway. The reason for that is that in this location, as the edge of the freeway gets closer to the fence with the 5th lane, we have opposing traffic. We have China Garden traffic going back and forth, and we have the freeway traffic. And because it is at grade and it gets within a certain proximity to each other, you install a barrier to prevent crossover traffic in an event of an accident. So we are proposing the safety barrier, but it is low enough given the grades that it does not obscure the view into that property, which is a little higher up on the hill. Let's see, go this way. Down in the area of location 2, we did also receive a couple of comments. One was from a resident near the end of Lamar Drive that was concerned about noise, both during construction, dust, those types of things. There are minimization measures in the environmental document requiring certain typical kinds of construction treatments in terms of keeping dust down and protecting. The area at the end of Lamar already has a sound wall, so the work will be going on behind the sound wall if the project is approved and moves forward. You can see in the picture the home, and the home has a wall along the edge of it, and then there's the state sound wall. So the work is going on outside in the state right-of-way behind this wall. So that wall itself will help screen what's going on during construction from the neighbors. Further down at Melrose, we are rebuilding a piece of the wall to move it back a couple feet in order to fit that extra ramp lane in that's coming in off of the on-ramp there at Douglas. So that one, obviously, there will be some disruption during construction, and again, we take measures to minimize those, and they are temporary. And a new wall, of course, is being replaced. The other comment that we received was from a property owner of a commercial site here at the on-ramp merge, where we have a culvert that comes underneath. Traditionally, the drainage in this area, if you look way back at the old maps, drained from the south to the north and went through this vacant area. And so there is a culvert to deal with the fact that a freeway was built there. But as development has occurred around that area, it creates kind of an open field that acts kind of like a bog, if you will. And so they're concerned about, drainage. The project, again, has conditions to not worsen that situation, but the purpose and need of the project did not include improving drainage through and outside the reaches of the state highway. So we have noted it in the project report so that when it gets to design, if there is an easy way to help make it a little better without costing, or getting outside the scope of the auxiliary lane project, there might be an opportunity to take advantage of that. But there is an existing condition that the project is not going to make any worse. We also got some comments from public agencies, as you see listed here. Roseville, Rockland, of course, have expressed at the staff level their support. And we have a request to continue coordination, of course, during final design to make sure, for example, the wall aesthetics that are placed along the highway, and there is a widening of the bridge at Linda Creek that the city has plans to put a bike lane underneath the highway at that location, so coordination for those things. Of course, consultation with Native American tribes in the area, and of course our regulatory agents, which again, the ISMND includes measures that require all the permitting that you would need, Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife, et cetera, that are required when a project such as this moves forward. I would note that the environmental document did look at all three alternatives and puts forth comparisons of their different impact or effect on those various environmental resources. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Luke, who's going to talk about that a little bit.
Thanks, Liz. So the project development team took into account the key goals that we discussed earlier and also the comments that were received on the draft environmental document. And these are the three project alternatives that the project development team had to consider. And I want to note that Alternative 1 and Alternative 2 are two build alternatives, actually have the exact same right-of-way and environmental impact. So there's no difference between those alternatives in terms of right-of-way and environmental impacts. We've actually handed this table out to the board. There's a lot of information here, so we wanted to give you a chance to review it. This is our attempt to compare the different alternatives, and this is the information that the project development team utilized. As you can, I do want to make a note actually on the traffic accidents, the second line. This is actually the accidents that occurred over the last three available years, and both build alternatives are expected to reduce these number of accidents, but that's the existing traffic accidents that are happening on eastbound Interstate 80. So our project development team looked at this. They saw the reduction in traffic congestion, the enhanced safety, decreased vehicle delay, improved travel speed, and travel times. And based on this information, there are the trade-offs between Alternative 1 and Alternative 2. Those are all benefits that Alternative 2 is showing. But compared to Alternative 1, Alternative 2, as I mentioned earlier, will reduce the Douglas Boulevard off-ramp from 2 lanes down to 1 lane. As you can see here, the cost is $2 million more, $16 million versus $18 million. And the construction schedule is about 4 months longer. But considering all of that, the project development team is recommending that Caltrans approve Alternative 2 as the preferred alternative. So what we're asking the board to do today is actually support the project development team's recommendation to Caltrans for Alternative 2. And of course, that's the eastbound auxiliary lane on Interstate 80 from State Route 65 to Rockland Road, and the 5th lane on westbound Interstate 80 from Douglas Boulevard to Riverside Avenue. And if the board is supportive and concurs with that, then the next steps would be to work with Caltrans and the Federal Highway Administration to approve the environmental document. And then beyond that, as most of you know, we've cobbled together as all the dollars we have to try and move forward with the first phase of the Interstate 80 State Route 65 interchange. So for the I-80 auxiliary lanes, we're going to need to identify a new funding source for design and construction. And we'll be providing this presentation along with project updates on the project website at PCTPA.net. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Directors, before I open this up to the public, do any of you need any clarification or have any questions on the staff presentation? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to open this up to the public. Does anyone wish to address the directors on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. This is time for board discussion. We have a request for approval of alternative number 2. Is there any board discussion? Entertain a motion.
I'll move approval and appreciate the staff's hard work on this over the last, 2 years at least, and keeping us informed about how the progress is moving along. And so I'm very happy to make the motion.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, we'll go on to item number 8, letter I on our agenda. This is the Transportation Sales Tax Expenditure Plan and Process Update. We'll begin with the staff report.
Yes, good morning, Chair Rohan, members of the board. We're here to have the board weigh in on moving forward with our transportation sales tax and expenditure plan. As we've been talking about for a number of years, this most recent effort dates back to 2012, but we've been looking at developing a local transportation funding source going back to 1999 that I've been involved with. And as we are moving forward with this, we are asking the board to consider the detailed narrative of the expenditure plan as well as a summary that is provided here. And let me go through the steps that we're looking at as we move forward. First of all, I want to clarify the roles of all of the players in a transportation sales tax and expenditure plan. The role of the jurisdictions in this is to review the expenditure plan and then approve that. And it requires a majority of jurisdictions representing a majority of the population and the county board of supervisors. And let me add, it's a majority of the incorporated population. So that means 4 of the cities/town representing a majority of the incorporated population, which is off the top of my head about 250,000. And then the County Board of Supervisors has to weigh in on the expenditure plan. After that happens, and assuming that we have met that threshold, then it comes back to PCTPA for consideration of the ordinance, and the expenditure plan is part of that ordinance. It's it's not an amendment to it. It is an article as part of that. And then it would go, assuming that that is adopted by the board, then it would go to the County Board of Supervisors to actually place the measure on the ballot. It's my understanding that is largely a ministerial effort. And this gives you a little bit of a graphic on how this works in terms of going to the jurisdictions, then the screening criteria, and then coming back to the board here, and then ultimately the Board of Supervisors. The elements of the ordinance, it specifies that there would be a transaction and sales tax of 0.5% for 30 years, and it includes the delineation of the expenditure plan. And some of the key provisions of that ordinance are in your board agenda under attachment 3 at page 20, but let me hit some highlights here. There is an independent citizen advisory committee that is called out. There would be 8 members under the current configuration, 1 from each city or town appointed, can't be an elected official. That's the independent citizen oversight part of it. And then the Board of Supervisors would appoint 2 members, and 1 of those should be from the Tahoe area. We did recently add a provision that should a new jurisdiction be adopted or be incorporated someday, that they would also get a seat on the Citizen Advisory Committee. We had, I should step back and say, we had a lot of input from all of the jurisdictions' attorneys, and they came up with some scenarios that we hadn't considered, such as what if there's a new city, and we've incorporated those into the draft ordinance. The ordinance also talks about the oversight committee would oversee an audit annually to make sure that the funds are being spent in accordance to the expenditure plan, and those would publish reports on an annual basis. The expenditure plan has a lot, and I'll go into the expenditure plan in greater detail as we go through the rest of the presentation, but I did want to point out some of the things that it spells out what is eligible for the local transportation fund, and these are the 30% of the money that would go back to the jurisdictions by formula. The ordinance specifies the formula, which is a combination of road miles and population. And it also has a minimum amount that would be $250,000 a year. At this point, the only jurisdiction that's subject to the minimum is Colfax, and it gives great latitude to the jurisdictions to know what the most important projects are in those jurisdictions, but that's largely going to be road maintenance and rehabilitation. That's what we're hearing from the jurisdictions. But there's also the opportunity, for example, for using that as matching funds for grants, for going even further with the local transportation needs. But that is included. There's also specifying that at least half of the county's share of that local transportation fund has to go to a rural road maintenance and repair fund. So it's specifically for, I believe it is 10 different MACs, those areas that are listed in there. It goes all the way from the Donner Summit MAC all the way to the West Placer MAC that would be able to weigh in on those. But frankly, from what we're seeing from the county, it's way more than 50% that would go to rural road repair. There is a maintenance of effort requirement that says that these funds that go to the jurisdictions for road maintenance, they can't be used to just supplant, substitute for existing expenditures. They have to be essentially in addition to those. And it requires that the jurisdiction give us a 5-year capital improvement program, let us know what you're going to spend the money on, and make sure that those meet the criteria. And that's something that independent citizen committee can make sure that those are being accomplished. So, as I say, the expenditure plan is really a lot of the heart of this, and this is a summary of where we have worked through a lot of outreach over a lot of years, and the board has been deeply involved in this to get the input and have come up with, we believe, is a broad and strong consensus in terms of how transportation funds should be spent. And let me go into a little more detail on each of these. The 8065 interchange, I think that's probably the most important and most mentioned project countywide in terms of need. I don't think I have to tell anyone on this board or probably anyone in this county what the problem is, that there are backups there at all hours of the day. There are serious accidents and fatalities in this area as a result of those backups. The proposal, as the board has seen on a number of occasions, would be to essentially reconfigure this interchange in phases. We have gone forward with the collector-distributor system, and you see some visuals here of how that would look once constructed, with freeway-to-freeway interchanges, or excuse me, it's an interchange, freeway-to-freeway. We are looking at the expenditure plan to contribute approximately $300 million towards this project. We also think it will attract a significant amount of federal discretionary dollars, because this is a high-profile project on a major interstate, and incidentally, the only all-weather crossing of the Sierra for 1,000 miles. Highway 65 is kind of in the same boat. It's backed up all the time. This is a typical photo of what you see going southbound during the morning commute. This would be a phased project that it's one of the things I want to point out is the 8065 interchange, actually that project includes widening of 10 lanes up to Pleasant Grove? Up to Galleria. And then from Galleria north to Blue Oaks, this project would be 8 lanes, so 4 lanes in each direction. And then north of Blue Oaks, it would be 6 lanes all the way up to Lincoln. About 70% of the money is expected from developer impact fees, but what you'll see in a theme of a number of these projects is what I call the chicken and the egg problem with developer impact fees, is that if you don't have the access, it's hard to generate the development impact fees, because projects don't develop if they don't have access. And so this also not only contributes to the funding for the overall improvements, but it also provides a financing mechanism to be able to start those projects earlier than we would otherwise, and then be repaid with those developer impact fees. That is certainly the case with the Placer Parkway. Overall, about 95% of the money for this project is going to come from those developer impact fees, but chicken and the egg. And this is particularly important in terms of building this new expressway slash ultimately freeway from Highway 65 to Highway 7099. Is there is a lot of economic development that is attached to the Placer Parkway corridor. Warwick University, the CSU Sacramento, as well as Sierra College expansion, and all of the jobs and economic development that comes from that. It's going to be hard for that to happen without access, and this would be provided through the Placer Parkway. Highway 49 operations and safety, Caltrans was good enough to do some visualizations that are shown here about what this project might look like superimposed on existing photographs. This would not only widen the road to 6 lanes, but it also adds sidewalks, bike lanes, landscaping, synchronizing the traffic signals, and just overall improving the traffic flow. The proposal here would be a $29 million contribution that would match a Caltrans contribution of about $30 million to make all of this happen. So that goes all the way from I-80 up to Dry Creek Road. Baseline road widening, another example of the developer impact fee issue, and that is about 85% developer impact fee funded. This would be to widen Baseline Road from Foothills to 7099 from 4 to 6 lanes, and the contribution is relatively minor. It's about 15% of the project, but this was also one of the things we heard a lot of in our outreach, that this was an important project to move forward with. I-80 auxiliary lanes, you pretty much just heard all about those, and we don't have the funding for construction. We believe that should the expenditure plan and the sales tax be successful, the alternative that you had just recommended, the $18 million alternative, would be 6 million of that would come from what we were going to shift over to the 8065 interchange. But if we have this new funding source, we wouldn't need to make that shift, and that's why we're recommending the $12 million. We have a number of interchanges that need improvement, and these are, I have to somewhat apologize because in Google Maps there is no traffic. And so these are invisible cars on this graphic, but there are improvements that are needed, whether it's ramps or overcrossings or even more significant improvements at Horseshoe Bar and I-80. I-80 174, there are significant impacts to the interchange there as it goes through Colfax and winds kind of through town, which makes it a rather awkward transition and has impacts to the city of Colfax. Rockland Road is also another interchange that has significant challenges in terms of traffic, as well as it being an undercrossing, and so there's limited right-of-way. And then the Highway 65 Nelson Lane needs to be brought up to interchange standards. That's really the gateway to the the Lincoln Airport. And a real economic driver in that part of the county. And so those projects would be expected to generate local developer impact fee funds as well, but can be matched with $95 million of the expenditure plan. Then,
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Jack.
May I?
Please.
Great.
Absolutely.
Just a clarification on Baseline Road. That work from 4 to 6 lanes is going to be west of Fittimit and Willerga, forward towards Highway 70. Is that
right?
Right. Okay.
Right. It is. I mean, the overall project is going all the way from Foothills to 7099. But yes, pretty much all the widening is a little bit further to the west.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Capital Corridor and Bus Rapid Transit. This is adding the third track between Sacramento and Roseville that will bring 10 round trips a day into Roseville. And this is phrased as an and/or, including bus rapid transit to western Placer County. And really we need both. And this allows a little bit of flexibility in terms of we think that we may be able to get a large influx of funds for the third track project through cap and trade, as well as other rail-focused discretionary pots, including the new FAST Act, the federal bill that has a rail entitlement for the first time. Not that it was funded the first year, but we have hopes that it would be funded in the future. But we also need an option for bus rapid transit out in western Placer County, certainly as those university projects are moving forward. Typically that's the kind of demographic that really needs and supports a high level of transit, and we need to be able to support those universities. So this gives us flexibility in doing that, as well as attracting discretionary money to make those happen, and that's estimated at $90 million. We also want to expand our senior and disabled transit services. That's a growing sector of the population, especially as our population ages. There's increasing demand on that. But there's also increasing demand for commuter bus services. The services we have are jam-packed, and we need to add more of those to more locations so that to really take advantage of that. That's also estimated at $100 million. And let me put a side note on this. All of these numbers are estimated because they are on a percentage basis, because the actual amount of sales tax revenue changes every year. And I'd love to say I'm psychic, but we have economists that are telling us that those overall numbers are going to go up over time, and that we can easily realize $1.6 billion over 30 years, but it could be more. I think that the $1.6 billion is a very conservative estimate, and so we want to be able to handle those variations without having to go back and start over because the actual dollar amounts might be different or in fact more. The percentages stay the same. What we're recommending in the ordinance is that this is all on a percentage basis. So, speaking of percentages and going to local jurisdictions, I mentioned that 30% of the funds would go to local jurisdictions by formula, and we have asked each of the jurisdictions to provide an estimate of what would you do with the first 5 years of transportation sales tax funds. We estimate Auburn's share as $17.4 million, just under $600,000 annually, and this is a list of the projects that the city has come up with. These are all road maintenance and rehabilitation projects, and on the right side of the screen you see a map of those, and they cover a whole lot of the city. They're in, certainly dire need of road rehabilitation money, and so this would go a long way towards that. Colfax also, you can see their plan is pretty much to repave the town. And considering their pavement condition index is at 40, when what you want to be is at 85, I think that this illustrates the need as well. And they are, as I mentioned, they are subject to the minimum amount, and clearly they need it. City of Lincoln also is got a long list of road maintenance and rehabilitation projects. Their share is about $55.7 million over the 30 years, and this is their plans to really repave a huge part of their traditional downtown area that sorely needs repaving. So you can see a theme that people are repaving. Loomis is right up there with the rest, their share at $9.2 million. They would be doing some work on their implementing their downtown master plan, as well as doing road maintenance and rehabilitation. Rockland has a really long list as well. And you can see, again, repaving a whole lot of the town, as well as doing some curb and sidewalk upgrades for Americans with disability compliance, which is an increasing issue for a lot of jurisdictions. Roseville also, you can see in the inset, they're repaving a good part of their traditional downtown. As well as doing some, providing some matching funds for some long-needed improvements, such as what's known as the Andorra Underpass on Washington Boulevard under the UP tracks. That's a huge bottleneck on a local road for them, and be able to make those improvements. Placer County, as I mentioned, they've got a long list. It's all rehabilitation projects. So certainly the one could say that the rural road maintenance and repair fund is the entire allocation over the next 5 years, not just 50%. And you can see those improvements are all over western Placer County, but then we go into Tahoe, and Tahoe's a separate pot of money, and that is, it's not just road maintenance, although that is part of it, but also transit enhancements, bicycle and pedestrian trail expansion, maintenance, and snow removal. Board member Trevis called me yesterday and said, remember, snow removal too. So there would be an estimated $48 million going to those improvements, and would be advised, the county would make the selections, but with the advice of the Tahoe MAX. We have a bicycle and pedestrian program as part of this. It's a competitive program. The parameters have not been specifically set out in the expenditure plan, but there is what the ordinance does say is it provides some of the parameters for that. The ordinance says that there will be established a criteria for the selection of projects, but it is suggested that they include safety, connection to schools, and the overall system usage and demand for those bicycle and pedestrian facilities, ability to attract matching funds, and lack of other funding for these. And it's not just bicycle and pedestrian, it's also safe routes to schools and neighborhood electric vehicles. So there's a variety of alternative transportation there, and that would be just under 5% of the funds, or 76%, or $76 million. And then there is also a pot of funds, we call it the Competitive Projects Program, because again, we're not psychic. Things are changing rapidly in transportation, and we need to be ready for that. And as we had our ribbon cutting this morning on our electric vehicle charging station, as just one illustration of new technologies, we expect that over the next 30 years we'll see a whole lot of new technologies and future needs that we don't know of right now. And being able to have a source of funds that can address those and attract discretionary money, that's a huge part of this, is being able to match funds for those emerging needs. And that is also just over 4% of the funds and $74 million. And then 1% of the money would go towards what we call transparency, accountability, and administration, and that is providing for those advisory committee, administering those, having the audits done, having those annual reports done, gathering all of that data and monitoring that data to make sure that we're doing exactly what the voters expect us to do should this be placed on the ballot and pass. So here's where we are. This is just the last couple of years. I didn't go the whole history. And the board is very well aware how hard we've been working on this, and we're now at the decision to proceed, and then ultimately going to some sort of a private campaign that would not be connected to us. So here's the schedule. Today the board is being asked to direct staff to go to the jurisdictions and start the process to have a transportation sales tax ordinance and expenditure plan placed on the November ballot. We have been working with the jurisdictions, should the board direct us to move forward, to get on those council agendas, which would take place between May 10th and June 21st. At your June board meeting, the board would be asked to consider the ordinance and the expenditure plan for adoption. And should the board then adopt those would be forwarded over to the County Board of Supervisors for placement on the ballot. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Before I open it up to the public, I'd like to ask directors if you have any questions. Yes, Keith.
Yes, thank you. The City of Auburn, I appreciate you getting kind of a finite list of some of the roads and stuff. I think that helps sell it to people. There was talk a lot about the Highway 49 signal synchronization. Is that part of the operational and safety
Yes.
improvements? And that is good that that's spelled out, because a lot of the Auburnites were saying, I don't mind that synchronization, but if we're not paving roads and we're going to put half of that tax money towards that, I'm not going to support it. So I appreciate, I think that needs to be spelled out and emphasized. So.
Yeah, and my apologies. Sometimes it's a little too inside baseball, right. And that's, I think we had talked about complete streets. Well, the public doesn't necessarily know what a complete street is, and so articulating the sidewalks and the widening and so on is. I appreciate your comment.
Once this is adopted, what kind of flexibility do the local jurisdictions have if we're doing a sidewalk project, or we get matching funds and want to switch those streets around? Tell us about the flexibility of the jurisdictions about directing that money once once that list is kind of in place on the ballot?
The capital improvement program is updated on an annual basis on a rolling 5-year, and if the jurisdiction wants to change something, that is their discretion, but they do have to bring that to us and make sure that we're aware of that.
So that would have to come to that advisory committee if they were revising the plan, or?
It would, but that is on an annual basis. And quite honestly, very few transportation projects have that short a turnaround that a year notice wouldn't be long enough. But if there is something that comes up, God forbid, a sinkhole, for example, and the
In Auburn?
then there's absolutely flexibility on that.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yeah, I have one. Yes, Jack.
What type of public outreach in a change in plan is anticipated? How does that work? Is it just, you mentioned that it happens on an annual basis. Is it just one opportunity, or is there a requirement for any changes to go out and have public comment on them? Or a public meeting to discuss the change?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer your question, because it could be answered a couple of different ways. In terms of the jurisdiction's capital improvement program, my understanding is that jurisdictions go to the board of directors or the city council, adopts your capital improvement program, and then that would be forwarded over to PCTPA, and the Citizen Advisory Committee would then make sure that as part of that reporting is also what you did in the last year, so essentially crossing off the list or changing the list, and the Citizen Advisory Committee would then be making sure that you're doing what you're saying you're doing and spending the money on transportation purposes. That's the same for the other projects within the expenditure plan. Now, there is a provision, say for example, as I mentioned, there is more money than we expect, and fingers crossed, and say we have completed all of the projects that are listed in the major highway program. There is a provision in the ordinance that would allow us to add another project to that, and that would be under the same provisions as the placement of the ordinance on the ballot, which is that the expenditure plan would be amended. It would have to go to a majority, all the jurisdictions and the Board of Supervisors for approval, and then ultimately adoption by PCTPA.
Okay. Now, at the end of the day, each jurisdiction has its own process for handling the finalization of their project list. So I think you answered my question. Thank you.
Other questions? I'm sorry.
Oh. No, somebody decided on that's okay. If I may. First of all, I want to thank staff for the tremendous outreach everywhere. I was at several of them, the municipal advisory council, city councils, workshops. It's been a well thought out plan, gathered all kinds of information from various sources. Some tough questions were asked, some questions that couldn't be answered were asked, but the staff has done a tremendous job working with Jeff and his staff, bringing consensus and bringing us something that looks like it can actually work. One of the things that are missing are the fact that all the traffic that comes up through Interstate 80, they stop at our restaurants, they buy gas, they're up in the Tahoe area spending money in the hotels, and that's part of where the funding will come from, the people that enjoy Placer County driving through that aren't residents. Also, bicyclists, we always get complaints about bicyclists don't pay into the road fund, and we got bike lanes, so they'll be, and there's people from out of the area that come and use our trails, bicycle trails, and so anyhow, it's been well thought out, and I'm very pleased the way it's been brought forward, so I just want to say that, and hope we move forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you. If there aren't any, Ron?
I was just going to agree with Supervisor Holmes on while the North Lake Tahoe area is a relatively small 3% of this, that's a lot to us up there, with working with the situation of just that he mentioned, with the number of visitors that are coming to that area that are requiring transportation enhancements to our transportation system, as well as the trail system, which is a great alternative in our transportation plan. And we've sort of moved ahead with this, with or without the sales tax initiative, realizing that the sales tax initiative will be a major funding enhancement to this, in that the through other efforts in these last couple of 3 years, we've developed this transit vision, of which the Board of Supervisors, thank you very much, has just adopted the Placer County portion of that says we should move ahead with some of this. So we're down now to the residents saying we need to do trail improvements, we need to do transit improvements, and to the extent we can still, local road improvements. And now we are moving forward with an actual voter survey, not as to whether to pass or not pass this measure, but we're sort of beyond and saying, what are our priorities for transit improvements? What are our priorities for trail improvements? So we're ready to go with this as through the support of the Board of Supervisors and hopefully the tax measure.
Thank you. Are there any questions at this time? Any others? All right, then I'd like to open it up to the public. Does anyone wish to address the board at this time? Good morning. Would you please state your name for the record?
Michael Garabedian. I'm just here as an individual resident of Rockland. I wonder if you have a report or estimates of the cost, average cost to families, different family sizes, and of course, I guess we can figure out major expenditures. A $30,000 car, I guess, would have an added $100 tax or something. But yeah, just wondered if you have numbers on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, we do. It is an estimate impact of between $61 and $63 per year per family or per household. And I was also going to mention that we estimate that about 1/3 of the revenue would come from out-of-county residents or
Thank you.
Visitors.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, then we'll close public comment. And it's now time for board discussion. If there's no further discussion.
Say we let staff move forward.
All right, we have a motion and a second. And this is to direct the staff to bring the draft plan to the various jurisdictions for their approval. Yes. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those, or do you want a roll call? Do you need roll call?
Only if someone's...
Only if there's opposition.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? All right, motion passes. Thank you very much for the good work.
Good presentations.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. And this is item J, the Executive Director's Report.
Yes, I actually have a couple of items, including the one that is listed there, which is an update on the Roseville to Sacramento Third Track project. We've been working closely with the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority, as well as UP, on getting this project phased. Essentially, a Roseville phase would be between $80 and $90 million, and the remaining portion of it between Roseville and Sacramento would be another 180-ish million. In phasing the project, it would allow us to move forward with a grant application and cobbling together some funds that we have that Capital Corridor has been spearheading. So we put this coalition together and to get these grant funds focused on the Tiger program, as well as really mostly the cap and trade program. The challenge was in order to get Union Pacific to agree to phasing the project. Typically, they don't do that. They want one big project all at once, and there you go. Capital Corridor was not necessarily very successful in getting the approval of Union Pacific, and I want to report that our federal advocate, Sandy Esposito, was able to come in and change that no to a yes. And remarkably quickly. What was interesting about this is that Capital Corridor had been working with UP, and it was weeks, maybe even months, and it was the 11th hour for this grant application, and we got a no. And I called Sandy, and the Capital Corridor got a little nervous. I will say that because, you know, they got to live to play another day with UP. But this is big for us. And within about 2 hours, UP was on the phone to Capital Corridor and saying, let's talk some more. At the end of the day for this phased project, we would get 3 round trips a day before the ultimate 10 round trips a day for the full project. So it's not quite as much as we wanted, but that is moving forward. The cap and trade grant has been submitted, and we will hear back probably in August or September whether that's successful. So just another illustration about teamwork and having a good federal advocate and how that benefits us. I wanted to also say a few words about former board member Kathy Lund. Her passing is a tremendous loss to all of Placer County. It's not just Rockland. Kathy was instrumental in brokering the deals that allowed us to move forward not only on the Lincoln Bypass, but also on the I-80 bottleneck program, because she really wanted and got the I-80 Sierra College Boulevard interchange improvements. And you can see her vision out there on the freeway now and what it's meant to the city of Rockland in terms of their economic development. And, you know, on a personal note, I will say when I first got this job, she scared me a little. You know, she's a force to be reckoned with. But as I got to know her, she became really a mentor, very adamant about supporting women in public service, and really pushed me, and I think she pushed a lot of women around Placer County in her formation of the South Placer Women's Leadership Group. And, you know, her passing is just a tremendous loss to this agency and to everyone. But one final thing, and I think Kathy would have liked this, and that is some good news, because you want to end a meeting on a positive note, and that is that I just the other day signed a lease with an engineering firm, and now the Nevada Station property is fully leased and showing a profit, that we are plowing into some deferred maintenance. So that's a real milestone for us, and I wanted the board to be aware of it. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Celia. Now time for director comments.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about Kathy Lund's passing. I took office here in 2005, and Kathy was still on the board then, and she was a little bit intimidating. And actually, I was a little bit intimidated because I defeated a nice lady when I won this office, and I knew Kathy was very supportive of her. But the first thing I remember, the first ribbon cutting, if you will, we went down to the Sierra College interchange and was able to celebrate that. And then, but she was so supportive of all the jurisdictions, particularly the Lincoln bypass. And she set an example about how we all work together as a jurisdiction, and I'll never forget that. And I was able to sit next to her in some of the meetings, and we shared comments, and she was just a force, but a gracious lady that wanted to do the best, not only for Rockland, but the community as a whole. So she will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any, yes, Keith?
Just a brief comment about Kathy, too. I think I came on in 2008, and she sat next to me the first year or so, and strong but kind, and every once in a while she'd lean over and say, I like what you said about that. I like what you said about that. So she was, I thought she was strong, but she was kind, and she had a great way about her, and she got a lot accomplished without being too much of a bulldog. But you know, she was her own kind, and I really enjoyed her personally as a person as well, and she'll be missed.
Thank you. Are there any other comments?
I'd like to congratulate staff and Clipper Creek for the nice ribbon cutting this morning and the opening of the electric car charging station. And I'm glad to see it's being used already. And I think that's, while not appearing to be a big thing, it's the type of thing that the PCTPA does that continues to make Placer County a leader in all aspects of transportation planning and expansion. Thank you.
If there are no other comments, the remaining items on our agenda are informational items. So with that, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. All right, is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.